Dual session. We have one paper followed by a panel. Frankly, I forget what we called this in the proceedings, something like Reflections on Learning Analytics. This paper, out of all the papers, most directly addressed the conference theme about learning analytics being multidisciplinary, multivocal. It is also a nominee for a Best Paper Award. We have 4 of those. The other 3 are all presented tomorrow. They're listed on the handout that Eric had, and also will be tweeted. So I'm happy to introduce Nicolas, Balacheff, and Kristine Lund, who I have worked with before on this topic, and I'm interested to see where they have taken it.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So good afternoon. First I'll introduce Chris Lund, who is based in Lyon. Myself, Nicolas Balacheff, I am based in Grenoble. And we are both researchers from the French National Center for Scientific Research. So we will present a few thoughts, ideas about multidisciplinarity and multivocality, and considering the case of learning analytics. Technology-enhanced learning is a multidisciplinary research area, as you know, and in which concepts, methods, problems have generally 2 origins. One origin could be within the field, where there are responses to the problem, the issues we have to address and to consider. Or they might come from the outside, they are borrowed from other domains, imported in technology-enhanced learning research, and used there in order to solve the problem we have. So in one case, they are related to what we will call the problematic. Its problematic is before the theoretical framework and the methodology. It's when we consider that an issue, a problem, is relevant for the type of research we want to develop, is relevant to the type of research we are doing. So it's not enough to point an event, to point a phenomena. We have also to discuss the fact that this is relevant for the research we do. And then we have to develop a theoretical framework or find one, or develop a methodology or find one. It is why we borrow from the outside. So what we will do today is to develop this around 2 main research areas within our field, which is learning analytics and educational data mining. So when we consider these 2 words, I first started to consider them as a part of a project, which is an attempt as responding to the addressed question, which is, where is the knowledge base of technology-enhanced learning? I mean, aren't you just reinventing the wheel every decade because of the push of the technology, of the development of computer science, or some new discovery in cognitive science or education? Isn't it just new discourse for old ideas? So we have to respond to this question. And for example, the project officers or the head of unit in Europe are always asking these questions, but I think it is true also in the US from what I know from the NSF. So a way to do that, a very humble way, a simple way to do that, is to pick up the terms we use, the keywords, and see whether we agree on any definition, characterization, not with the idea to have just one way to see the world, but to understand our commonalities and possible differences. It is what we will do for learning analytics and educational data mining. For learning analytics, as far as I know, and maybe others will have a different point of view, but there is more or less a consensus that this expression is imported or born within technology-enhanced learning research close to 2010, maybe 2009. And it has very soon after that had a first conference, very soon in 2011, which means actually that the concept were formed enough mature so that people could share research results, share a consideration of methods and theoretical framework, and have a conference on that. In the case of educational data mining, the situation is a bit different. The educational data mining is born, it seems to be born at the beginning of the year 2000, and it had its first conference as such, and editorial initiatives in 2011. In between, there have been workshops and places within different conferences where people interested by this area met and discuss. Actually, this suggests that it is related to something which is older, and the relationship between educational data mining and knowledge modeling, as it was born, learner modeling, as it was born within ITS, is a relationship which is quite strong. So there are differences in the history of both, but it's not enough to say or to claim that there are differences in between the two research areas. So is there any what I would call semantic differences? To respond to this question, one solution was to look at the literature, and we did that, and to pick up the definition proposed by the researchers, and we did that, and actually there is, for educational data mining, there is one of the entries of the dictionary. But when we look at what is written, explicitly said, there is not much, I mean, the difference is not easy to catch. And so the other idea was, why not look at what is published, what is produced by the communities in working in these domains. It is what we did. We did that first with the Open Archive on Technology and Learning, and this Open Archive actually has papers, although there is about 2,000 papers now within the archive, it's a bit too old, so it's difficult to trace either one domain or the other. And so what we did, we took the corpus of the Grand Challenge problems, which come from the Network of Excellence Stellar, which is a European network of excellence, which means that it was a large community of researchers funded by the European Commission. And from the Grand Challenge problems, looking within the text, we try to trace the presence of educational data mining, of learning analytics, and of the keywords which are related. And what we saw is what you see on this graph, which is that we have around a cluster close to learning analytics, here in blue, here in red, a cluster which is closer to educational data mining, but there is no direct contact, I mean, in terms of the lexicon and in terms of the words being used. Actually, the contacts come from data. Data is the bridge between the two clusters. Indeed, this is not a surprise, I would say. When we say that, people in the audience may say, okay, data is shared by both community. But we will explore a bit more what it means to be shared, and we see that here in the graph it is a borderline, to say, which means that it could be, as Dan said, a boundary object for the community of learning analytics, but also a boundary object when we look at it from the perspective of the community of learning analytics and educational data mining. To have a better, a sharper understanding of that, we dived into working groups which were at the origin of these Grand Challenge problems. And there are two of them which are especially interesting to look at. It is the DataTel, which is a working group, a workshop, which was working mainly on the analytics with the objective on improving recommender systems, and the other is the productive multivocality, which is a workshop which was directly addressing the issue of how is it possible, and how do we share data and share what we have to say about these data. Doing this analysis, what we saw. We saw first that there is almost no shared vocabulary between these two workshops. This is a bit of a surprise, actually. And we will look with Chris closer at what it could mean in the case of productive multivocality. The second is there is a difference, a clear difference in the objectives of the two workshops. For one of the workshops, DataTel, the idea is to improve the algorithm, to develop the algorithm, to have a better recommender system. And for the multivocality, as I said, it was questioning the interpretation made by proposed by different communities around or different disciplines around the same data. So in the end, we have these differences which emerges from what we analyze from the outcome of these two workshops, and it reinforces the idea that data is maybe a word which is shared, but there is no evidence that it means the same thing for these communities. And so I will give the floor now to Chris. Who will show us what it means to have different view on data from different disciplines.
Thank you, Nicolas. Okay, in the second part of this talk, I think I'm on the mic now. I'm going to introduce this productive multivocality initiative. And then first I'm going to relate how we can relate it to defining and analyzing data in different frameworks. And second, show how that relates to unpacking the terms learning analytics and educational data mining. And I also want to say that we're giving this talk as outsiders. And so our proposition is a humble one. A multidisciplinary group of us has been working for about 5 years on sharing and analyzing corpora of small group pedagogical interactions. And in fact, a book is coming out with Springer this year with these editors that you see here, and you can see that Dan is also here. And so this is where the productive multivocality term is coming from that he's been talking about at this conference. And in the work in this book, we've shared 5 corpora, and each was analyzed by 3 or 4 researchers coming from different traditions. And we asked the researchers to analyze their corpus in terms of what we called pivotal moments. And we suggested that concept as a kind of a boundary object, where they were free to define it in a way that fit with their framework. And so it turned out that most pivotal moments described a change in state, either showing learning or phenomena that were understood to be promoting or favorable for learning. And so this gave us a means to discuss. Now, when people from different disciplines get together, it can be good or bad, useful or not, as I'm sure we've all had the experience. And in order to argue about what can be positive, I'm going to briefly define multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and multivocality. In multidisciplinarity, neither theoretical perspectives nor actual results from different participating disciplines are integrated. Okay, so everyone is kind of in their own domain and their own, within their own boundaries, and a particular object can be approached from different angles separately using different disciplinary perspectives. On the other hand, interdisciplinary research integrates contributing disciplines by creating its own theoretical, conceptual, and methodological identity. And it does this by analyzing, synthesizing, and harmonizing links between the different disciplines in play. And I'm ready to make a value judgment about interdisciplinary research being more fruitful than multidisciplinary research. And I'll also argue that the multivocal research, which just means multiple voices here, like Dan said earlier, has been productive in an interdisciplinary way. Granted, the people that worked on our project for the last 5 years performed their multiple analyses from different epistemological and methodological frameworks on a shared corpus, but the work became productive when, for example, we were able to refine analytical concepts, when we were able to make explicit epistemological positions. I'll just briefly say what that means. It really has to do with how you view reality as a researcher. Either it's objective and you're looking for general laws and you think that you can discover them in a objective way, or you think that reality is socially constructed, and depending on your different views, you're going to not do research in the same way, right? So that's quite important. Another example of productive multivocality is defining the multiple conditions under which different views of learning can be characterized, and then this also gets us really discussing together on particular issues. So our argument in this paper and in this talk is that the learning analytics community is much like the computer-supported collaborative learning community, where it is multidisciplinary, but it has a potential for interdisciplinarity. And I'll also argue that our version of multivocality anyway, is closer to interdisciplinarity than to multidisciplinarity, and I'll give you an example of that right now. And so these types of approaches, I think they really can move research fields forward in the way that I just illustrated in the last slide. And so the communities, the different communities around learning analytics are therefore nicely positioned to benefit from such approaches, much in the same way that CSCL has been. And so it's a challenge that we've been thinking about here, that we bring to you. And so let's look a little bit more closely at how multivocality can tend towards interdisciplinarity in terms of the different forms of integration that can be taken up. And so I refer you to the paper for the details because I'm going to have to stay on an abstract kind of level here. One of the corpora that we worked on in the book was on fractions in a Japanese 6th grade classroom, and where the students were asked to fold, then cut 3/4 of 2/3 of the origami paper. So the researchers, they looked at the video, a snapshot of which you can see here, and they analyzed the transcript that went with the video, and here you can see a bit of that as well. And they were looking for the pivotal moments in their own frameworks. And you can see here just, I have them labeled, 3 researchers worked on this corpus, and you can just see the moments are of different length. And if we got into the details, we could tell about how they exposed different assumptions about learning. And this kind of exercise really helped us focus on what learning was really in this situation. So if we are thinking about interdisciplinarity happening when researchers become capable of integrating either method or theory together, then I can give 2 examples. The first, without convergence, but there's still a bit of integration going on. And the second, where there is convergence. Okay. And so the first happened when 2 researchers compared their pivotal moments and progressed in their problématique, what Nicolas mentioned, the French word for the motivation around the research. And I'll mention just one better understanding that occurred. So the researcher Chu had identified these breakpoints and frequencies of new ideas in the corpus. And Shirozu, another researcher, hadn't noticed those as being important for him, but he was able to reconceptualize those moments in his own framework, and he conceptualized them as corresponding to how the pedagogical designer's intentions were actualized by the student's behavior. So there wasn't much convergence here, a bit of integration, but a discussion has begun, so that's already something. Now, in the example with multivocality with convergence, this happened between 2 other researchers comparing their pivotal moments, and one of them was actually able then to extend his definition of an analytical concept. Now he was using Bakhtin's voices to analyze the transcript, and he was used to just working on chat interactions. So here he was working on face-to-face interactions, and he incorporated gestures into the concept of voice of Bakhtin. So this was an analytical integration on a theoretical level. He also extended the domain of application. He was able, to use his method on face-to-face interactions with gestures. So deeper theoretical integration is a bit more difficult. We're getting towards theoretical and methodological integration here, but having said that, we don't always aspire to that, we're not looking to have some kind of all-integrating theory, right? Because tension can actually be productive. And so to get to that, we think where there is productive tension going on in this community is really around the data, as also what Nicolas mentioned previously. So we could ask this question: what is shared by a teacher having to manage a lesson on ratio and proportion, and by the dean of the university having to ensure the success of the freshman class? There's learning, right, in both those cases, but what does it mean? So we are joining Siemens and Baker in this call of cooperation with the suggestion of analyzing the nature of data and the different problématiques that are around this analysis of data. And so here are 2 definitions. I won't read them. They're here, but we are giving these 4 questions really out to the community as a basis for beginning this discussion with you, tending towards interdisciplinarity. 1, are the learning analytics tools imported from analytics sufficient for relevantly analyzing learning data? 2, should all data attached to the activities of a student be considered as learning data? 3, isn't learning analytics reducing successful learning to the academic success of students in their institutions, thus limiting the problematic of TEL research or educational technology research? Compared to the classical problematique of learner modeling, what are the specific contributions of learning analytics? And are we done, or we're not done?
No, it's not. It's almost finished. We have 1 minute, which is too much. Just to tell you that among the review we had for this paper, one reviewer said, but it would be much more significant if you could analyze the publications within LAK. I mean, from the learning analytics conferences and knowledge conferences. So we started that. We have special thanks to Mihai Dascalou from Bucharest, who contributed and made the job, and will work with us to prepare a paper communication about the results of that. And so what we saw actually is that a kind of a discrepancy within within this corpus. We have the 2 concepts which emerge: learning analytics on the one hand, and educational datum mining, because it is the singular is chosen in the label of the concept, but the 2 concepts are present. And when we look at the words which are related in the first approach, and this has to be, strengthened, but what we find is that there is a gap between the set of the words which are significant for us. I mean, those words which are related to learning, and that you see in black in this on the right-hand side of this slide. But there are still 2 words in common, which are tool and model. And the question beyond that is how far can we clarify the relation between the 2 fields and the problematic within which both of them are working. Beyond these differences, we have to not only shape the differences, but also through that understand how we could relate and find complementarities between both fields. Thank you.
Just a reflection. Don't you think that the learner model is now implicit in the issues concerning learning analytics? On the contrary, some years before, using ITS, for example, that we had a fixed learning model in advance, and maybe that leads us to some difficulties in collecting the data that we need.
In my opinion, learner model is present in both. The problem is what it means, learner models there. And even beyond that, it's what means learning in both communities. It's not clear what it means. So learner modeling, even in the talk we had, I followed today, and from the first introduction plenary this morning to the talks we had all through the morning, the issue of making sense of the learner understanding and the nature of the learning outcomes or the way the learner learns, this is at the core and there is explicit proposals within the learning analytics community to offer models or representation, visualization of something related to this way the learners understand the way they develop their learning. So I think that if I take the words, they are present and at the core of both. Now, we have to look at which type of data, which type of model, what means, I mean, on one side, it seems that the old tradition, not tradition, I mean, one problem which was resistant, really resistant, we have not solved, is to be able to have a kind of automatic interpretation of the outcome of the learning process. An automatic interpretation of what the learners know or has learned. And another direction is, could we have a powerful representation of the learner, of the learning, that we can offer to the learner and we can offer to the, or to the teacher or other population. But this representation is actually a model of the learner, in my opinion.
Thanks. Thanks for the talk. Just to understand it better, why do you think it's important to find this difference or similarities between these two fields?
Maybe Nicolas wants to add something. I guess for me the answer is fairly evident in the sense that these are two fields that are quite similar, working on similar issues, and so it seems to me that one of the things we want to avoid is having two communities that don't speak to each other, but yet are working on the same issues. And so if we can come to an agreement about the terms being used, what do they mean, what kind of learning are we talking about, what are we focusing on, this kind of conversation allows people to come together and just make progress more as a larger community. In general, that's the main response.
It's difficult to respond to this question, but I would suggest the following. There is a big difference between suggesting to a student that he has to make this choice or that choice in the curriculum, because from what we see globally of his or her trajectory through the courses, through the resources, it would be better for him or her to go in this direction or that direction. You not necessarily need to have a very accurate view of the epistemic level, of the cognitive level. You are looking at that from, at a level of granularity which is completely different. At the same time, you may need to have feedback to the learner at a more thinner grain. And for example, in the talk we had this morning, when we had this issue of the cognitive relevance of the environments that we propose to the learner, it targeted this level where if they are writing somewhere that 1/2 plus 2/3 is 3/5, you don't need you need to have a feedback which targets this misunderstanding or this misconception in mathematics. But it's of different nature and with different data and different treatment than you have looked at 10 years study of, you have the history of a learner along 10 years, and they say that they want to become a lawyer or engineer or whatsoever. You may tell them, yes, you have a good chance, or you see when you look back, it's quite a challenge to become this or that in the future. So at the university, it might be more interesting for you to go in this direction or this other. So the differences you see again is more on the problematic and the type of problem you are trying to address. And both problems are of importance. In my opinion, we have not to jump in a new boat because this boat may be more visible at a certain point. Both are really essential for the good development of our field.
Want to say something?
Yeah, I'll add something. That I don't think we really need to. We should stop worrying about EDM and LAK. Even within one of these, we have to deal with these issues because of the diversity. You know, if you've got the example of the dean and the teacher, they're shared their perspectives. The experimentalist, the ethnographer, the data miner. You know, if we want to have coherence to the field, we need to have some boundary objects for supporting that discussion. And in our experience, we found it's not enough just to analyze the same data, for example, because people conceptualize what the data is differently. We had people, we gave them what we thought was the same data. They came out with completely different representations that we couldn't align with each other. We found it's helpful to have some kind of general concept, like find the pivotal moments. They're still going to conceptualize them differently, but that drove some of the discussion. Why is your conception different than mine? So we're looking for strategies for people from different disciplines to dialogue in a multidisciplinary field like this to make it interdisciplinary. I better let somebody else ask a question here. Yeah, we got like 2 minutes left in this session.
This is just a quick comment. I think one of the challenges with what you've done here is that you've disambiguated between two academic research communities. But when I think of the term learning analytics, lots of other people jump to my mind. Provosts, presidents, educause and CIOs, these kinds of people are talking about learning analytics, and I think they're often using it the same way as some of the researchers. And so that's a different, the learning analytics community, to me, is actually much broader than the research community, the people maybe that are here. And I'm not sure that the same is happening with EDM. And so I think that terminology-wise, this would be an interesting thing to consider as you continue looking at this, whether it's just a disambiguation between academic research communities or whether there's kind of broader communities that are using the same phrases in similar ways.
I think that's a really good point, because it's true that the way we framed this particular presentation was in terms of how researchers from the two different communities were using the terms, and you know, what are the concepts behind them as they go about their research. You know, are they incommensurable? Are they compatible? This kind of a thing. But indeed, other stakeholders are using the same kinds of terms, and what are they putting behind them? And it's equally important to take a look at that as well. So, point very well taken.
Okay, this will be our last discussion.
Oh, good. So for our last point, I'll ask a question that I don't think is probably answerable right now. So good food for thought for the coffee break, which is what Dan mentioned a moment ago, I think is really important, and reminded me of some of the stuff with the multivocality, which was that the data wasn't enough as a boundary object. You needed that sort of semi-similar lens of the, in this case, pivotal moments, to make the analyses talk to each other. And I think that whether we're talking across or within communities, that notion of talking to each other is really important. And so my question is, what are the sorts of things that might serve as the additional framing of the boundary object of data in this context?
Yes, well, that's the next question, isn't it, that we have to answer. In the end of our talk, we did put forward data, per se, as a boundary object, but as we found out together in the Productive Multivocality Initiative, that wasn't enough, and we needed pivotal moments in the data to have, like you say, a kind of a similar lens from which people could look at the data and get them talking to each other. But at the same time here, if you look at what's happening in the very end, we've got tools and models that are showing up. So maybe as keywords across the two disciplines, so maybe those, if we ask more specific questions, like how in a kind of how pivotal moment was to data as tool and model could be to something, you see what I'm trying to say, something more specific about tool and model that we could ask between the two communities, and then that would give us a way to enable the discussion and get people talking to each other in deeper ways.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next we have a panel on the next generation of data, what are they, data analysts, which we've just kind of set the field in which they need to consider their work here.